You're listening to the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, a podcast of curated conversations with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development. Get ready for inspiring interviews, educational lessons, and thought-provoking discussions that will challenge you to execute something new and innovative that will drive results in your organization. And now, here's Dr. Tanya Lowe.
Hello. You're listening to episode 004 of the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. In 2019, I released Results Driven Organizations, the 4 keys for a high-performance workplace. And this podcast is designed to expand the conversation with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development, and what it really takes to create and develop and maintain results-driven and high-performing organizations. Our guest today is Dan Betancourt. Dan has been president and CEO of Community First Fund since 1999. He has over 25 years of experience in small business and community economic development lending. Dan is responsible for the overall success of the Community First Fund and is focused on advancing their mission by building and maintaining vital relationships with corporate, government, philanthropic partners, and targeted communities. Under Dan's leadership, Community First Fund has grown into a regional community development financial institution, attracting multi-million-dollar investments and with nearly $200 million under management. Dan, welcome to RDO.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to have you here. So Dan, we met on Clubhouse, we connected on LinkedIn. As soon as I heard you speak, I was like, I've got to bring him into this community because I wanted to know more about you. I've only given folks a snippet of your background, but the first question right out of the gate is, you didn't wake up as president and CEO. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your journey to where you are now. A little bit about where you are in your journey to where you are now.
Sure. First of all, I woke up as a New Yorican, family of 9, the whole thing. And I was born in New York and we quickly moved to Pennsylvania in grade school. And so I started grade school, even though I was born in the U.S., not knowing English, because, at home we only spoke Spanish. And I remember very first thing was, what the heck's this teacher saying? So that was the beginning of my journey. And, a lot of people think, Tanya, they only see the end result. They see me as the CEO and, okay, great, and what they don't know is the struggle.
Yes.
And, while I am Latino and I say I never can walk the shoes of a Black person walking down the street, immigrant communities do face discrimination. And the good thing is, I will say that we have developed allies among our communities over the years. But so, just like a typical student, the struggles of our families understanding middle-class institutions and just all that discrimination along the way. But I did eventually, after getting over not thinking I even belonged going to college, I took that fear and actually low expectation of myself and, just studied in the library. And then lo and behold, I kind of figured out after a year, maybe I belong here. And I started rebuilding that confidence that I probably would have had. But, being a person of color in America, it's just a different journey for all of us. And so I was very fortunate, to get a really good banking job as a management training job. That you kind of learn all aspects of the bank and just kind of moved up in banking. And I was able to come to this really nascent community nonprofit bank, essentially called CDFI, the Community Development Financial Institutions. And over the course of the last 20 years, growing this from a $300,000 loan fund, meaning, $300,000 to lend, to a $200 million institution.
Wow. It's interesting that you said, people, they see where we are now, but they don't see the struggle. They don't see, I call it all of the nurturing and the building that takes place to get to this moment in time of what they see. And so with that being said, can you think of maybe 3 people who've helped you grow as a leader to your path to where you are now? And what lessons did you learn from them?
Well, 3 leaders. One was in high school, my high school counseling was not a person of color, and looked at my transcripts and didn't even suggest that I should go to college. Part of what I was saying earlier. And there was a gentleman who had gone to church with me, who was a counselor, wasn't my counselor, and he was Puerto Rican American, and he basically said, like the talk, like, boy, you are going to college. And he proceeded to help me fill out the financial aid form, the essay, and then drive me to college. It's something that most people are privileged. Your parents would have driven you around, but my parents didn't even know to do that. So I got to say that John Galanza was, set me on that pathway. And then there was a woman, one of my first jobs one of the best things that I think happened to me was John helped me get a summer job in my field. And by the way, I didn't even know what I wanted to study. I didn't know I was going to study business administration, but the requirement of that job, John said, Dan, I got this job in an insurance company, but you have to be a business major. And I'm like, and I was undeclared at that point, right? I was and so I said, okay, I'm going to declare. And so Dorothy Crispin was head of HR, and she had a sense that, we had to give opportunities to people of color. She kind of set me on my way. And then I met along the way, I don't know what it was, but in college, I was an activist, getting involved in, believe it or not, political campaigns and, doing door to door. I don't know how I got this thing. I guess because my dad, worked in a union. He was always involved in voter registration, things like that. And so I met this Jewish gentleman named Eric Brown. And I guess he was just watching me at one point. Right. And then when I graduated from college, he said, Dan, we got this management training program at this bank. We've never had Latino apply before. That's a novel thing. That's kind of a sad commentary, but he got me in, he set me up on his career. And then, I call them angels, right?
Right.
Dr. Lowe, I mean, there's these angels in front of us that help us and just make incredible difference in our lives.
I definitely agree. So these three people have been very pivotal in your development as a leader, as a person. How does that play out, Dan, in how you lead today? The guide for this amazing organization.
Right.
How have these lessons played out? How do they show up in how you work and develop other people today?
One of the things that I always said to myself is, I never want success to change who I fundamentally am. And never forget that journey that question that you asked me, right? How did I get here? And just lifting people up along the way. That includes employees or future employees, or just constantly. One of the things I'm in this, nonprofit lending, industry, and it's a movement, right? Where Black and brown banks helping communities of color. And what I do constantly is mentor or support organizations all across the country. And I naturally do that. And then internally, the financial industry is not a traditional industry for people of color.
Right.
And so this is very unusual, but you're probably not going to find a bank that 60 to 70% of their employees are Black and brown.
Wow.
And, that's just a commitment that we have. And, if I tried to wait to see, and look for employees that work for banks, there's just not enough. I mean, go, try to find a real estate lender that's, either Latino, African American. The banks don't hire them. So, we have to know that we have to develop folks internally here over time. And that's what we've been doing.
Wow. And that's what I hear you saying, that we take people, we give them an opportunity, and we develop them, which I think is so critical in organizations. When we talk about results-driven organizations and what it takes to really maintain a high level of efficacy, it really comes down to developing people and creating more leaders. So I love that you're doing that. So Dan, I want to switch gears for a second. And I love quotes. And one of the quotes that, I love Peter Drucker, and he has a quote that says, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." As a leader, what does that quote mean to you? And how does that look in your organization?
Well, it clearly, you have to know your core purpose. You have to know, in academia, they call it, knowing your theory of change. And what that really means is, what was the reason why your organization was formed or founded? What were you trying to solve for? Because once you understand your core purpose, that's what drives everyone to do extraordinary things. One of the easiest core purposes for your listeners to know is, for example, Disney World. Everyone knows Disney World. No, their core purpose is just this is a simple sentence: to make people happy.
Yeah.
Now think about that. Someone is moving that broom, cleaning that walkway that you're walking down, and that person doesn't see their job as cleaning or maintenance. They see their job as making the people that walk through that place happy. So when you have your employees rowing towards a same core purpose, you can do extraordinary things together. So I think once you have that down, then you can think about planning and strategy. But you got to get that down.
I love it. I love it. It's really living your mission. And I go into a lot of organizations, and before I go, I read their mission. And when I walk in the door, actually, when I pull into the parking lot, I want to feel that mission. And many times the mission of an organization, they're just words on a wall. They don't really play out. And so I love that, getting people back to the purpose, our original purpose of what we're here to do, and we're here to serve. And so I think that is great, because I don't know about you, but when we focus so much on strategy, it tends to do something. There's a shift in the people that we work with and we lead, and it causes the organization to shift in functioning. Would you say?
Absolutely. This may surprise you, but some of the best concepts that I get in business come out of the church. And I find myself saying things like discernment and other things, the sin of racism. I use that word because there's no other way to describe certain things. And, and so when you talk to your allies, particularly white allies, you just got to be straight and forward to understand our core purpose of, helping communities of color with finance. So, and when you walk into community first, when you're talking about the mission, the first thing you're going to see is the picture of the founder of the organization, Jim Heisen, who's African-American banker in my town that knew, and the history of Black banking. It was founded by community leaders.
Yes.
Because you couldn't get back. And so that's who Jim Heisen was for us. And we have to proclaim, another church word, proclaim our work and then go forward and give the good news. So I don't use those words in business, but I believe in that. I believe that our work is a vocation.
Yeah. And
that has to be tied to your mission. So you see, it's a ministry in the end. And once people can see that, I can use business words, but the foundation of that, I think the church has a strong advantage. And we know in the Black and Brown community, it's extremely important.
Oh my God. I love that. I love that, because, leadership is about discernment. Yeah. It is about eradicating the sins, if you will, that will take our organization from being results driven to toxic, and really maintaining that culture. We use a lot of words, right? But I'm really big on, how do we live those words? Which leads me to my next question. And Dan, I can talk to you all day. I know we just...
And I love your reaction to what I said, because, it's not, business people don't talk like that, right? And I don't even talk like it, but it's in my core.
Yes, absolutely. We've got to get back to the core of people, because people make organizations great. Bill Bradley said, leadership is unlocking people's potential to become better. Like I said, I love quotes. I have a ton of leadership quotes at my fingertips. Do you have a favorite quote or philosophy on leadership? And how do you live that quote out loud in your organization? We've talked about getting to the core and really operating from a place of development and motivating people to do better. But how do you have a favorite quote, and how does that live out? How does that show up in your organization?
I don't know that I have a favorite quote, but I certainly have a favorite passage. One of the poems that I read when I was young or in college, my freshman year.
Okay.
And I had a black professor of English, and I always forget the name of the author, but it was basically We Wear the Mask. And it talked about how people of color, particularly black folk, have to hide their feelings, right? We wear the mask. And I never forgot that. And what that's a really internal, and if we Googled it, you know who that author was away right away. It's not a leadership thing. It's just as part of the struggle that we deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And how we have to, have allies to do our work.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm really focused on in terms of quotes, I think is, George Floyd has had a big impact in America.
Yes.
And I think about numbers, like 8 minutes and 63 seconds. And, those are the things that I think when you got your core purpose, leadership is about understanding why you do what you do. And so we went through a discernment process internally about that. And I think we're trying to project that out to communities. And so while that event crippled America to some degree, parts of America, it's now an opportunity for let's say government and even white corporate institutions to invest in organizations like mine. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing the Googles and the Amazons and the Netflix, and I don't know if you've noticed, and even government, now the Biden administration, saying we got to have a war on poverty. And in the ways that Martin Luther King, and I'll quote him, when he talked about that check, not having sufficient funds, I'll quote that. And I think only now are we having a reckoning in America for our generation.
Right.
And I think, look at that $1.9 trillion. I know we're not here to talk about politics, but they didn't compromise on that.
Right.
And if you look at that, you're going to see that there's going to be a war on poverty. And I think we're only getting back to what Martin Luther King talked about, helping our people.
Wow. Wow.
And then those of us who are leaders have to unlock ways to do that.
Definitely. What do you believe are the biggest challenges leaders face today?
One, I would say, is trying to get the best employees and really attracting the best employees. You always talk about employers market, all that, but I look for those. I think one of the biggest things that I need to do as an employee is talent, as a leader, is talent management. I don't know if a lot of leaders think of it that way, but I have lots of things to do: raise money, manage finance. But I never stop thinking about talent management for any moment. So that number I gave you, 60% of our employees or 70% of our employees are people of color, that doesn't happen by accident.
Right.
That happens by constantly thinking, recruiting, talking, and finding people, and then making a place where people want to work. So said another way, Dr. Lowe, the biggest asset on our balance sheet wasn't that $200 million I told you about. It was the assets of our employees, and everything else kind of falls in place when you have dedicated people who were lined up with that core purpose, who know that we're here to remove barriers for communities of color and building wealth where it wasn't available before. And so I think it's ultimately that's the leadership challenge that I have.
Wow. Finding that talent to fit into your organization. And I've heard that when I've spoken with leaders, when they bring me in and, we've got this high turnover or we can't attract good talent. I think it comes down to two things. I think it comes down to, are you willing to bring people in to develop them that may be different from what your organization is used to bringing in? And I also think it comes down to toxic work environments. And so many times my clients will bring me in because there's toxicity in the organization and it's stopping things from moving in the direction that it needs to go to get results or to work with communities or to meet the bottom line. What are your thoughts on toxic organizations? And tell us if you have a process for ensuring your organization doesn't succumb to organizational toxicity.
Well, I think one of the most important things of management executive team is to pay attention to staff morale.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, something technical that we do, a good practice is to do what they call engagement surveys. And we do them every year. And so we get to understand what the employees are thinking, understand the toxicity that you're talking about. We'll know the department it's in, the area it's in, and then we'll develop plans to work on that. And so, I don't know if you read those books about employee engagement, but it says something like, 60% of your employees are engaged, but 40% are not. Mm-hmm. At all time, every organization. So, and of that 40% that are not engaged, 20% are not engaged, but the other 20%, that 40, they're actively disengaged, meaning they're working against the company. So knowing that you have 20% of any company actively disengaging and working against the company, then at your peril, you don't pay attention to employee morale and engagement. So that, talent management encompasses all of that. Right. And I think when you get rid of the rotten apples, in other words, said another way, if you have a tipping point of that number is more than 40%, that's not a fun environment to be in. And if you don't weed out the employees that are toxic, you're going to have the good people leave. So it's just extremely important to pay attention to employee morale for any leader.
And you're absolutely right. The good people, the people that you want to stay, they're the ones that will leave. I've been that person. I've worked, unfortunately, in toxic environments. I think that's probably why I do the work that I do today, because I know it's so important and it's so vital to nurture growth and to really help people meet their goals. Help people meet their goals and to create an environment that is safe, an environment that really goes back to the mission, the purpose of why we're here, why we do the work that we do. So, Dan, I could talk to you all day. One, it's been great. What are you reading that we should be reading?
Well, the one that's, I think, it's one that we're reading now with their entire executive team and management team, is a book called The Color of Money. It's a little academic, but the subtitle is Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap. And I think this is a very important book for professionals. I don't think anyone should graduate from business school without reading this. Okay. And it's people should look at that. Then there's a book, it's called The Sum of Us. It's probably less academic. And I was trying to remember Heather's last name. You probably heard of her. But you look it up, it's called The Sum of Us. Okay. And I was recommended that by someone in Atlanta, the town that you're in.
Yes.
So I think people, if they just looked up that book, they'll quickly find it. Lots of history on communities of color. And I think that book, I think is, I said to you, one of the most important books that we could read, because it puts all of the racial construct and discrimination, what happened in America to Black folk, in one spot. And I think you got to know your history. Your allies have to know the history, and the philanthropy and government has to know our history so that we can make sure. I mean, I don't have to tell you that, we talk about some administrations not being fair to people of color. We're coming out of a period of time where people were blamed for their challenges in the community, and then this was not the toughest environment for us. I was reading the book, and you go back to the Woodrow Wilson administration and the New Deal, and that excluded Black farmers from loans from the USDA, and it excluded people from helping Black banks from mortgages, and it just goes on and on. So this thing's been going on, and the Reconstruction. We all know the Reconstruction. The people who were in the Civil War in the South aligned with the Northern bankers, discriminating against Black business owners. So we have to know about our history. Yes, we have to contend with that, and then we got to move forward with all the leadership things that you and I talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely going to put those books in the show notes. And I think, touching on something you said, our white allies, if they want to know what can I do, at least have an understanding of why we feel like we feel. And in reading these books and expanding your knowledge will also empower you to have a little more understanding and be able to truly advocate at a better level. So I really appreciate you sharing those resources with us. We've been chatting with Dan Betancourt, President and CEO of Community First Fund. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit the show notes to find out about how you can connect with Dan and learn those resources that he mentioned. And be sure to grab a copy of Results Driven Organizations, the 4 Keys to a High Performance Workplace. Use the link in the show notes, and be sure to grab your special gift by going to freegiftfromtanya.com. Until next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Be sure to review the show notes for the resources mentioned, and don't forget to grab your free gift available at freegiftfromtanya.com. Until next time.